I spent $18,000 on a Christmas Eve dinner that nobody showed up to eat, and the only person who walked through my door that night was my grandmother, holding a manila folder that would end my family as I knew it. My name is Whitney Calloway, and I'm 36 years old. I stood in the kitchen of my house in Charleston, South Carolina, listening to the caterers wrap up trays of food nobody had touched. The smell of rosemary and brown butter still hung in the air, mixing with the cold December wind that kept sneaking through the front door every time someone walked in to load up another chafing dish. Outside, white lights wrapped around the porch railings I'd had installed 2 weeks earlier, because I wanted everything to look perfect. I wanted my mother to walk up that brick path and see, for once in her life, that her younger daughter had built something worth being proud of. She never got the chance. None of them did. For most of my life, I was the quiet disappointment in the Calloway family. My older sister Felicity was the one who did everything right, according to my mother's math. She married a man named Carter Whitfield when she was 26, a man who came from old Charleston money, the kind of family with a name on a building downtown and a portrait of some great-great-grandfather hanging in the Battery Club. Carter was tall, pale, smooth-talking, the kind of man who could walk into any room in this city and have 3 people offer him a drink before he even asked. My parents, Earl and Roberta, treated him like he'd descended from heaven itself. It didn't matter that Carter had been let go from 2 different banking jobs in 5 years. It didn't matter that Felicity hadn't worked since they got married. What mattered was the name, the connections, the way he made my parents feel like they'd finally arrived somewhere they'd spent their whole lives trying to reach. Meanwhile, I ran a boutique event planning and PR firm out of a converted carriage house behind my first rental property, back when I had nothing but a laptop and a stubborn refusal to quit. By the time I was 34, I had built that into a company that handled crisis communications for 3 different hospital systems in the Southeast, and a handful of corporate clients who paid me more in a single retainer than my father made in a year teaching high school history. I bought my house outright at 35. 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a kitchen I'd designed myself with the kind of attention most people reserve for their wedding. I never told my parents the exact number. I learned a long time ago that anything I built would get measured against Carter's last name and somehow come up short. So that Christmas Eve, I decided to stop being quiet about it. I invited my parents, my sister Carter, and my mother's sister, Aunt Patsy, to my house for dinner. I hired a chef who'd worked in Savannah's best kitchen for a decade. I had the dining room redone with a 16-person table I didn't need, because some part of me wanted them to see the empty chairs and understand exactly how much room I had in my life, how much I'd built without their help. I checked my phone every few minutes as 6 o'clock came and went. Nobody texted, nobody called. The chef kept glancing at me kindly, the way you look at someone you can tell is about to have the worst night of their year. And finally, I told him to go ahead and start plating, even though every chair at that enormous table sat empty except mine. At 7:15, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Whitney, we ended up going to Carter's parents' house instead. They have the whole family there and it just made more sense. You understand. We'll see you for New Year's. That was it. No apology. No mention that I'd spent the better part of 3 weeks planning this. I read it twice, then set the phone face down on the marble island and gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles went pale. Felicity's parents' house was 11 minutes away. Mine was 22. 11 minutes wasn't the reason. It had never been about distance. It was about who they'd rather be seen with. I sent the chef and his 2 assistants home with double pay and the entire dessert course packed up into containers, because I couldn't stand to look at 12 creme brulee that no one would ever taste. The house went silent in that particular way. Only a big empty house can go silent, where you can hear the refrigerator humming from 2 rooms away. I sat down at the head of the table I never use, in the dining room I'd designed for exactly this kind of night, and felt the full weight of being 36 years old and still waiting for my own family to choose me. I picked my phone back up because some sick part of me needed to know what I was missing. Felicity had posted to Instagram 20 minutes earlier. A video, not a photo, set to some sentimental piano music, captioned "Family is everything, blessed Christmas Eve." I watched it without meaning to. The Whitfields' dining room looked like something out of a magazine, all white candles and gold flatware. My mother was laughing at something. My father had his arm around Carter's shoulder. And then the camera landed on Carter himself, holding court at the head of the table like he owned the room, which in fairness he probably did. We were supposed to go to Whitney's tonight, Carter said into the camera, grinning, raising his glass. Felicity, behind the camera, laughed and asked what happened. Let's just say I didn't feel like driving across the bridge for a meal cooked by somebody who's never run anything bigger than a hashtag, he said. No offense to her little PR thing. It's cute. But this is what a real family Christmas looks like. My mother's voice came in clearly from off camera. Now, Carter, be nice, she said, but she was smiling when she said it, the kind of smile that meant she agreed and just wanted credit for pretending otherwise. My father's voice followed. She'll understand. Whitney's always been independent. She doesn't need the fuss like Felicity does. I sat there with my thumb frozen over the screen, rewatching the 11 seconds where my own father egged away my humiliation as a personality trait. Independent. Like I'd chosen this. Like I'd asked to sit alone in a 16-person dining room with 12 untouched place settings because I preferred it that way. The comments were already rolling in under the video. Friends and cousins, typing heart emojis and so blessed and the Whitfields know how to do it right. Someone asked where I was. Felicity replied with a single laughing emoji and the words Whitney does her own thing. I don't know how long I sat there, long enough for the candles I'd lit down the center of the table to burn most of the way to their holders. Long enough that when I finally heard the front door open, I jumped, because I hadn't heard a car in the driveway. It was my grandmother. Whitney Calloway, my father's mother, 79 years old, standing in my front hallway in a wool coat the color of dark plum, her white hair pinned up the way she'd worn it my whole life. She had a manila folder tucked under one arm and a look on her face I'd never seen on her before. Not soft, not sympathetic, something closer to controlled fury. "Grandma Birdie," I said, getting up so fast my chair scraped against the hardwood. "What are you doing here? I thought you went with everyone to the Whitfields." She made a sound in her throat, something between a scoff and a laugh that had no humor in it. She walked past me into the dining room, looked at the candles burning down, the empty chairs, the single-place setting where I'd been sitting, and shook her head slowly. "I did not go to that man's parents' house," she said. "I would rather sit in my car in a parking lot eating a gas station sandwich than spend one more Christmas watching my own son bow down to a boy who can't hold a job longer than 18 months. She set the folder down on the table with a sound that felt heavier than paper had any right to be. "I came here instead, because I have something you need to see, and I have been waiting 11 months for the right night to show it to you. I believe tonight qualifies." My grandmother was not a woman who showed up empty-handed or spoke without purpose. She'd spent 40 years building a real estate portfolio in Charleston, back when almost nobody believed a black woman could do that kind of business in this city, certainly not on her own. Certainly not without a husband's name backing every signature. My grandfather died when my father was 19, and instead of remarrying or folding the business, she'd grown it. By the time I was old enough to understand what she did for a living, she owned 11 properties between downtown and Mount Pleasant. And she ran the whole operation herself out of a small office above a coffee shop on King Street, refusing every offer to retire. "Sit down, Whitney," she said. I sat, she didn't. "You spent money on this dinner," she said. It wasn't a question. $18,000, I admitted, my voice cracking on the number. "I just wanted them to see." "I know exactly what you wanted them to see," she said, cutting me off, not unkindly but firmly, the way she'd cut me off as a child, when I was about to talk myself into an excuse for somebody else's bad behavior. "You wanted your mother to walk through that door and finally look at you the way she looks at your sister. You have wanted that since you were 7 years old, and I have watched you spend 30 years trying to earn it. Tonight I am going to save you another 30. She opened the folder. "2 years ago," she said, "your father came to me and asked for help covering Carter's debts. Quiet, behind your mother's back, behind Felicity's back. Carter had run 2 failed business ventures into the ground, a wine import company and some kind of real estate flipping scheme. And he owed considerably more than your sister knows to this day. Your father didn't have that kind of money lying around on a teacher's pension, so he came to me." She slid a page across the table toward me. I said no. I told him if Carter made his bed with bad debt, he could sleep in it, and that I was not in the business of bailing out men who think a last name is a financial plan. I stared at the page, a copy of some kind of loan document, Carter's name printed clearly across the top. "So your father went somewhere else," my grandmother continued. "He took out a second mortgage on the house I gave him and your mother 30 years ago. The house you grew up in. He used it to pay off part of Carter's debt without telling your mother where the money went. He told her it was for a kitchen renovation that, as you may have noticed, never actually happened. The room tilted slightly. Dad mortgaged the house, I repeated. He did, and he has been 6 months behind on the payments because Carter never paid him back a single dollar of it, the way Carter promised he would once his next venture came through. She slid another page across. The bank sent the default notice to my office instead of your parents' address, because I am still listed as the original property holder on the deed restriction I put in place when I sold them the house below market value. I have known about this for 11 months. I told your father I would handle the bank directly if he told your mother the truth himself. He has not done that. He has spent 11 months letting your mother believe their house is safe, while he funnels money toward a man who calls your work a little hashtag thing at the dinner table you were not invited to. I sat with that for a long moment, the candle wax pooling on the tablecloth, the silence in the house pressing in from every corner. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I finally asked. Because you would have tried to fix it, she said, and for the first time that night her voice softened. You would have written a check and let your father go right on hiding the truth from your mother, and let Carter go right on living like consequences are something that happened to other people. I needed you to see it for yourself, on a night when you couldn't talk yourself out of being angry on your own behalf. I looked at the folder, at my father's signature on the refinancing document, at the default notice, with its red-stamped warning, at a wire transfer record showing $41,000 moving out of my parents' equity and into an account with Carter's name on it. What do you want me to do with this? I asked. My grandmother finally sat down across from me, folding her hands on the table the way she did when she was about to negotiate a property deal, which I suppose, in a way, she was. I want you to understand something about power, Whitney, she said. You have spent your whole life thinking the way to win in this family was to become so successful that they couldn't ignore you anymore. You built a company, you bought a house, you hired a chef tonight that could feed 40 people, and it didn't matter, did it? Because success was never the currency this family trades in. Comfort is. They will always choose comfortable lies over inconvenient truths, and they will always choose the person who flatters them over the person who challenges them to be better. She tapped the folder. But I am going to tell you what I told your father 2 years ago. I do not bail out foolishness, and I am not going to let that house go into foreclosure protecting people who would let you eat Christmas dinner alone in a room you paid for. She told me her plan. The bank held the note on the second mortgage, but she held something else. A right of first refusal on the original property, written into the deed restriction from the day she'd sold my parents the house decades earlier, a clause my father had clearly forgotten existed, if he'd ever fully understood it at all. If the loan went into default, she had the contractual right to purchase the property back before it ever reached foreclosure auction, at a price already fixed in that original agreement, decades below what the house was now worth in Charleston's current market. I am not doing this to hurt your father, she said. I am doing this because I am tired of watching him hurt you to protect a son-in-law who has never once thanked him for it. And because somebody in this family needs to start telling the truth before this house, the one your grandfather and I built our whole legacy around giving your father, gets swallowed up by a man's pride. We sat at that long table until almost midnight, my grandmother walking me through 3 more documents, emails between her and the bank's loan officer, a handwritten letter my father had sent her 8 months earlier, practically begging her to reconsider helping. A letter she'd never answered because she was waiting. She said, for him to tell the truth on his own, he never did. 2 days after Christmas, my grandmother called a meeting. Not a confrontation, she was careful to say, a meeting. She asked me to come, she asked my parents to come. She did not invite Felicity or Carter, which my mother questioned immediately and loudly when she arrived at my grandmother's office above the coffee shop on King Street and saw me already sitting there. This concerns the house, my grandmother said, before my mother could finish asking why I was present for what she assumed was a family business matter that had nothing to do with me. And it concerns Earl. She looked at my father, and I watched something in his face fold inward, the particular look of a man who has spent 11 months waiting for a conversation he's been dreading, and finally understands it has arrived. She laid it out plainly, the second mortgage, the $41,000, the missed payments, the default notice sitting in her office for 11 months because she'd been protecting the house, and by extension protecting my mother, from a foreclosure my father had quietly set in motion to bail out his son-in-law. I watched my mother's face go through something I can only describe as a structural collapse. The kind where you watch someone's entire understanding of their own life crack open in real time. 11 months, she said very quietly, which was somehow worse than if she'd screamed. You let me believe we were renovating the kitchen. You let me tell people. You let me show Patsy the paint swatches, Earl. My father didn't have an answer that survived contact with the documents in front of him. He tried at first the way men like my father always try, with a story about wanting to protect the family, about not wanting to worry her, about Carter promising it was temporary, just until his new venture closed. My grandmother let him talk himself in a circle for almost 2 full minutes before she set the final piece of paper on the table. A text exchange she'd subpoenaed, in essence, by simply asking the bank's loan officer, an old friend of 40 years, to forward her the correspondence trail. In it, Carter, 8 months earlier, had texted my father, "Tell Roberta whatever you need to. Not my problem how you explain it to her. I'm not paying you back if the next deal doesn't come through, you know how this works." My mother read it twice. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she stood up, smoothed her coat, and said she needed air, and walked out of that office without looking at either of them. My grandmother bought the house 3 weeks later, exercising her right of first refusal exactly as she'd planned, paying off the defaulted second mortgage in full, and taking the deed back into her own name before the bank could touch it. She did not throw my parents out. She let them stay, but she restructured everything. My father now pays her direct monthly rent, modest fare, nothing punitive but real, with his name nowhere near a deed again, until he and my mother together decide what they actually want their next chapter to look like. My mother, for the first time in 38 years of marriage, opened her own checking account that my father has no access to. She told me the week after, in a tone I'd genuinely never heard from her before, that she was done finding out about her own life secondhand. Felicity found out about Carter's debts the way most people in our family eventually find out anything. Through my mother. 3 days later, over the phone, in a conversation Felicity later told our cousin lasted almost 2 hours and ended with her crying in her car outside a grocery store. She didn't call to apologize to me. I don't think it occurred to her that an apology was owed. Not really. Not when her own marriage was busy falling apart in front of her. Carter moved out in February. I heard, secondhand, the way everything in this family travels, that he'd already found someone new to charm into believing he was one deal away from everything finally working out. I never sent my parents an invoice for the $18,000. I thought about it. I decided in the end that the real cost of that night had nothing to do with the chef or the candles or the flowers I'd had flown in from a farm outside Asheville. The real cost was 30 years of mistaking my own family's comfort for love, and I wasn't going to put a number on the night I finally stopped paying that bill. My grandmother and I have dinner every Sunday now, just the two of us at my house, at that same long table. She tells me about her properties, about the building she's eyeing on Upper King Street, about how she built every single thing she has from nothing, while people who looked like her were told it couldn't be done. I tell her about my company, about the new contract I just signed with a hospital system in Atlanta, about the things I used to only tell people who would weaponize them against me later. Last Sunday, she raised her wine glass, the same Bordeaux, it turns out, sitting in my cellar since that Christmas Eve, never opened, waiting for the right night, and she looked at me across that table built for 16 people, and she said the chairs didn't need to be full to mean something. They just needed the right people in them. I am 36 years old, and I finally understand that my grandmother was never trying to teach me how to win against my family. She was teaching me how to stop measuring my worth by an empty chair and start filling my own table with people who would have shown up the first time, without a manila folder, without a default notice, without anything to prove at all.